Greetings, traveler. I am SnapJelly, and there is not a sword around that people tell more bullshit about than the katana. Right? Both people who like katanas and people who don't, just spout nonsense for no reason. So much so that I decided to make a video about it. So here it is. Now, in this video, I'm not going to show you any individual comments, because both out of respect for the people, because I mean no disrespect to the people who commented this, and because all of these have been commented multiple times, they would just take really long to show them all. So, but I'm gonna tell you right now, all of the things that I'm gonna say are comments that I received on one of my videos, right? So they're all things that people said to me, and well, let's just start. Katanas are curved because that makes them easier to draw, or it makes it easier to do a draw cut. This is the thing that many people say, and it's also not true. You see, where this comes from is mostly Yaido, which is a type of Japanese swordsmanship that quite continuously displays people just putting their sword back in their scabbard and drawing it again and back in the scabbard, and that combined with its slight curve makes people say, well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Makes it easier. But no, it doesn't. You see, curvature doesn't change the way that you draw a sword. It looks like it does, but it doesn't. What happens when you draw a sword is you pull it out straight, right? Because if you pull it out at a slight angle, it gets stuck. You see, what happens is as you draw the sword out, it is going to be scraping against the inside of its own scabbard. It doesn't matter if the sword is curved or not. If you draw and you twist your hand while you're drawing, it is going to be scraping against the inside of the scabbard. Also, if you have a really curved sword or a slightly curved sword, it doesn't change a thing. You see, as you draw the sword out of its scabbard, you need to let the sword guide itself out, right? Because if you try to force it, you don't know precisely where the curvature of the sword starts. So what you do is you pull it out straight, and the curvature will guide itself out. If you want to force it, it doesn't work. So there's no difference between drawing a straight sword or a curved sword. Now, again, with the draw cut, again, the curvature makes it seem like that's really easy to do. But, it doesn't change anything with the draw. You can do a draw cut with a straight sword as well. You see, what you do when you perform a draw cut is you draw the sword out of the scabbard. You can see that, can you? Am I in shot? I'm not. Anyway, you draw the sword out of its scabbard entirely, like that, and then you do the cut. The cut is performed with a twist of your wrist. What you do when the sword is completely drawn is you do this, essentially, like that. You give it a wrist flick. That's the cut. And once more, it doesn't matter if your sword is straight or curved, because you are going to have to wait until the sword is completely out of its sheath. You draw it out straight, like I just said. It doesn't matter. Curvature doesn't increase your capability to do a draw cut. It looks like it does, but it doesn't. Second one, katanas are curved because of the quenching process. Now, this is not, as far as I know, completely untrue, but it's kind of pulled out of proportion. You see, if you don't know what quenching is when you rapidly cool down heated material. So that's a thing that happens during forging. The metal becomes really hot, and you put it in either oil or water or something, and it cools down. And people say that because the katana is harder at the edge and softer in the middle, that kind of just pulls the curve into it while it's quenching. Makes sense, but here's the thing. The katana is not the only sword that is hard at the edge and soft in the middle. Multiple swords have that, straight swords have that as well. Again, the katana is not the only sword that is made with this specific quenching process, and there are also katanas made without this quenching process, and they are still curved. You see, this process, it didn't just, appear. Swords developed. And katanas or the katana's predecessor, I suppose, was already curved before this process was invented or discovered, I suppose. And likewise, there are plenty of curved swords that are about as curved as the katana is. Well, like this one, for example. This is a Dutch saber. This one is about as curved as a katana would be, slightly more curved, I suppose. But this one wasn't made with that quenching process. It's still curved, though. You see, the quenching process might help. It might have a part in why it's curved, or it might just be easy. But it's not the reason. You gotta understand that. People deliberately made the katana curved, and it's just speculation as to why, because there are various reasons why you would want a curved sword over a straight one. Curvature has certain assets that straight swords don't, and the other way around. And there is no single reason. There is not a it's curved because this, it's curved because that. It's curved because a lot of things. And apparently in Japan they liked the curvature because the majority of their swords were curved, if not all, actually. The quenching process would have played a part, but it's not the reason, because even with that quenching process, you can still make straight swords. It's not impossible at all. So if they really wanted the katana to be straight, they could have made it straight. They deliberately made it curved. Alright? The third thing is, katanas are faster than any other sword. I also addressed this shortly in my previous video, link in the description below if you're interested, because people have the idea that katanas are really swooshy type of quick swords, where you draw them quickly and you go like, and one blow and poof, your opponent is dead. Now, that's not really wrong, but it's kind of wrong because every sword has that principle. Really, every sword has that principle. You know, this only applies if you think that other swords are heavy. And that's what my previous video was about. They're not. So, there's really not much in weight difference at all. And for its size, katanas are relatively heavy. They're not too heavy that it would become a problem. But if you look at other swords of similar size, they tend to be lighter than the katana is. Because the katana it's a pretty fat sword. It has a very thick spine, so it makes it a bit heavier. But it's not faster at all. It doesn't need to be at all. There are two things that make a sword fast or slow, and that is weight, which I just told you, and balance. Right? If a sword is more balanced towards the tip of the blade, it is gonna be slower to move. And what you see as you handle katanas from various different time periods is that the balance goes all over the place. It changes with time, because the katana may look like it didn't develop, but it did. There were changes, and a lot of those changes were in the balance as well. Similar to Western swords, or any swords, they just changed. There is no set balance for the sword, and likewise, there's no perfect balance for the sword, because balance that is very close to the handle, or all in the handle, really decreases the cutting potential of the sword. So you can have a sword that's freaking sharp, like as sharp as possible, but still, if it has no power behind the swing, you're still not gonna cut through anything. So there is no perfect balance, and it just changed. What you gotta understand is, they were, for no reason would they be faster. They are sharp metal bars, like any sword is a sharp metal bar, and humans are humans, and they can just move at a certain pace. That's just it. Some humans are faster than others, that's true, but the sword doesn't change anything about that, really. If a katana wielder would be insanely fast, then you would be just as fast with a long sword, and the other way around. So, there you go. Another thing that popped up quite a lot, and this surprised me because I didn't know that people thought this, but that is that katanas were made to fight against unarmored opponents, or lightly armored opponents. Now, this is not untrue, but once more, name a sword that is designed to fight against armored opponents. There is no sword that's designed to fight against armored opponents, because swords can't break through armor. People like to believe that they can, but they can't. So, how does this make sense? This also applies to the idea that many people have that samurai for some reason wore bamboo armor. Or wooden armor. Now, this is not true. Samurai armor was steel. It was steel plate. Somewhat leather, you know, it's arguably a bit less defensive than the armor of a knight would be, but still it was steel plate. You wouldn't be able to cut through it with a sword. The idea that katanas were designed to fight unarmored opponents, it's kind of a weird thing to say, because all swords are designed in a way to fight against unarmored opponents. They're just made to cut humans. And they're not made to cut steel. They can't cut steel. That's why people wore steel, because it protects them. It's kind of a weird thing to say.